Okay, I want to wish you all very welcome to this debate with the topic, Is Christianity Rational? My name is David Sandstrom, and I will function as the moderator today. The debaters are Robert Brotherus and Douglas Jacoby. Robert lives in Helsinki. He's the chairman in the Freethinker Union and active with the Finnish Skeptic Society for several years. And he has written about 50 articles on topics of atheism and skepticism in magazines of these associations. And he works as a software architect. Douglas Jacoby is currently living in Atlanta, in America. He's a freelance teacher, a Christian, a consultant. He's also a writer, has written about 20 books, and is the founder of Athens Institute of Ministry, which is an institute that trains people for Christian work. I want to say something about the structure for the debate. It looks as following. They will have, in the first part, for the opening statements, they will have 15 minutes each. In the second part, they will have 10 minutes each for the first cross-examination. Then they will have 4 minutes for the second cross-examination, then 5 minutes each for the rebuttal. After that, we will have a time for questions and answers. So you have received a little paper that you can write your answer. Your question. Sorry. Your question.
We have to guess the question.
The question. And one question, and please write clearly so that I can read it. And you can write your question during the debate, and I will ask for them later. And then it's final statements, 3 minutes each. So I'm going to give the opportunity for Douglas to begin. Opening statements and 15 minutes. Go ahead. I'll tell you when to start. You can start.
Thank you for coming to this event. I believe I can speak for Robert and me both. We're very honored to be here today. We look forward to a productive time. Is Christianity rational? A critical examination of the life and teachings of Jesus. What does critical mean? Some people think it's impossible for a believer to think critically. I'll tell you what my bias is. Not all of you would know who I am, but I am a Christian. I've been a believer since I was in university, which is now about 35 years ago. Is it not possible for a believer to have some degree of objectivity? Well, if you wanted to learn about marriage, wouldn't it be better to ask someone who is married than someone who has no experience of that? In fact, to not be in faith, I think would put you at a disadvantage. And all that means is that it is possible for a believer to think critically about his own faith. Rationality. We're talking about Christianity being rational. Rationality is about reason. Irrational means rejecting reason or not following reason. Rational means reasonable. One interesting thing I found out before, when Robert and I were upstairs, we're both members of the Skeptic Society, and I sense even in our casual discussions that we're both quite skeptical about many of the same things. Rationality. I do not believe, I must say, it's not irrational to be an atheist. It's not irrational to be a Muslim, to be a Christian. Depends on your starting place. If you were brought up without any evidence for faith and you remained skeptical, I think that's rational. But if you saw evidence for faith and you wouldn't change, then that would be irrational. Depends on the starting place. It's always irrational to deny the truth simply to preserve our own paradigm, our own convenience. I need to say this because there's a lot of funny thinking, a lot of ill will caused by people with overly black and white thinking. Some believers think that all non-believers must be stupid. And there's some unbelievers, non-believers, who think that all believers must be mentally challenged. I was at a hotel in Oxford last year, and I reached into the drawer by the bed, and there was a Bible, as you find in some hotels. And I believe an atheist had written in the Bible, it was in blue ink, it said, warning, fiction. And underneath it, in a different hand, by a believer, was written in pencil, Psalm 92, 5 and 6. So I looked it up. O Lord, how great are your works, how profound your thoughts. Senseless people do not know, fools do not understand. And so you have the unbeliever saying that this is fiction, and you have the believer saying, well, you're stupid for thinking so. That's not the approach we're going to take today. Whichever side of the issue you're on, let's approach the discussion with mutual respect and an open mind. Christianity is founded, obviously, on Christ. I want to talk about 10 facts of his life briefly, then we'll talk about some of his teaching, and finally, in my opening statement, why I believe this is indeed rational. When I talk about facts of his life, I'm not going to talk about his walking on water. That's nothing that could be proved by history, obviously. I personally believe that Jesus Christ was God in the flesh, but that's not subject to historical verification. I'm sticking to the critical facts. I've experienced that in my life, but let's talk about what we can all agree on. That he was born no later than 4 BC. 4 BC was the year that Herod the Great, who tried to kill him, died. In fact, Herod's burial chamber was identified just about 3 years ago. Fascinating if you ever go near Bethlehem. Jesus, secondly, was from a large and poor family. We know he was poor because of the sacrifice offered when he was born. Large family because 4 of his brothers are named and a number of his sisters are referred to. It was a family of at least 10 people. Third, he was from the tribe of Judah. The genealogies in Matthew and Luke may not agree completely, but they both agree that he's descended from Judah. And that, I think, is beyond dispute. He's descended from David. Next, he was single. Presumably, it was a disadvantage to marry. Certainly, he knew that he was going to come into collision with the religious establishment, and he chose not to marry. If the Bible's correct, he foresaw his own execution. He knew that he would not be able to work very long. He was next a skilled manual labor. The Greek says tekton. It could be a carpenter, it could be a stonemason, but it was someone who worked with his hands. He walked a lot. Presumably, he was fit, he was physically tough. In appearance, probably very normal. When he was arrested, Judas tells the high priest group, I will identify him by a kiss. If he was taller than everyone else, or he had blue eyes like some of you and blonde hair, he would just say the tall guy over there on the right. Judas identifies Jesus with a kiss, and thus they were able to make the arrest. Later, legends, Christians couldn't resist the temptation to speculate in the next century, and they said Jesus looked a certain way, and he never laughed, and he always cried, and he was very serious, but none of that comes from the New Testament. Next, he was critical of established religion. He didn't think that just because you're religious, you're okay. He was a student of the Jewish scriptures, and he was called a rabbi. He got in trouble. He caused the established leadership, he caused the priests to be very upset with him, and I think I understand part of this. He challenged their lifestyle. In Jerusalem, there's a house that was burnt in the first Jewish war, 70 AD. And if you go into that house, you see the high standard of living that it belonged to a priest. The high standard of living that the upper class priestly establishment enjoyed. Jesus was severely critical of them for this. He was executed under Pilate. He was crucified. Crucifixion was normally preceded by torture. According to Lucian, the martyrdom of Polycarp, Josephus, often people were whipped. First, their eyes sometimes would be lost. Often their tongue would be cut out. Their veins and arteries could be visible. They could be whipped to the bone, and even whipped until the intestines were exposed. Of all the accounts of crucifixion in the ancient world, there's only one survivor that is known, and that was one of Josephus' friends, the Jewish historian and statesman, and his 3 friends were crucified for just a couple of minutes. They took them off the crosses. 2 of them died anyway. Only one survivor. No one would have invented this. If Christ did not suffer this kind of death, no one would make it up because it was too shameful. It was a very shameful beginning. It's like the Jews inventing the story of their slavery in Egypt. Some people doubt the Exodus, but if you're in the habit of making up your religion, why would you say, oh yes, our ancestors, we're very proud of them, they were slaves? You could have done better if you're creating fiction. And keep in mind, too, that they allowed the testimony of the risen Jesus first to be given by women. And under Jewish law, the value of a woman's testimony was 0. It was on the same level of the testimony of a thief, and that can be easily proved. His first followers believed he was raised from the dead, and he had an impact in all strata of society: men, women, minorities, Jews, Gentiles, educated, uneducated, everyone. Even skeptics were won over. His first followers believed he was the Messiah, the anointed one, prophet, priest, and king. There's strong historical evidence to the existence of Jesus and his movement. 9 non-Christian sources mention him in the first 150 years after his death. I'll skip the names for right now. In addition to 33 more Christian sources. Tiberius was the emperor during the time Jesus was killed. Tiberius, the Roman emperor, 14 to 37 AD, appears in only 10 sources altogether, one of which is the Gospel of Luke. And so if you're going to be excessively skeptical about Jesus, you have to be skeptical about Tiberius and many other historical figures. What did he teach? Quickly, more quickly even than I'm speaking right now. 10 of his teachings. It was a prophetic call to obedience. He stood in the stream of the prophets. He was courageous, and yet he went far beyond the prophets, because none of them claimed to be the Messiah. None of the prophets said, I'm divine. None of them connected himself with Yahweh. Salvation by ancestry is rejected. You're not saved because you're born of a fine religious family. Jesus rejected that completely. You have to live the life. He did not teach salvation by faith alone, a modern Protestant fiction of the 16th century. You will not find that in the Gospels. He was the divine Messiah. He said that the kingdom of God had arrived, that we should not be overly attached to this world, that the people of God soon will no longer be a political unit. Rather, they will live among the nations of the world. They'll cease being a national entity. The people of God are to include the Gentiles, not just the Jews, but it would open up. We are to love our enemies, which was a change from the Old Testament, a huge change. And last, that we'd be called to suffer. Now, if we follow Christ, we would be suffering. His life, which I spoke about first, and his teachings, which I spoke about second, come together. They converge. And he said famously in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No other religious teacher says anything like that. Why do I think Christianity is rational? First, if there's a God, it's reasonable that God would make an attempt to communicate with us, his creatures. And you may say, I don't know about that. You mean the incarnation, God becoming flesh. Well, what better way for God to connect with humans than for himself to become a human? You may be an atheist, but admit that's a reasonable idea that does make sense. Of course, the Gospels give us the details about this. The Old Testament also, in prophecy, points to Jesus Christ. I've talked to a number of rabbis this year. One of them was very interesting. I brought him to our ministry school. And he said, well, yes, I agree. The prophets of the Hebrew Bible, they do indicate Jesus is the Messiah. But in our synagogue, we focus more on the Torah. So we don't deal with those parts of the Bible. But many people would admit freely, just as they did in the first century, and many Jews followed Christ as a result. His resurrection was not accepted at first. There were skeptics. Well, even Jesus' own brother James was a skeptic, and Paul, Saul of Tarsus, was skeptical even to the point of killing Christians. If there is a God, as former atheist Anthony Flew said, I quote, if there's a God, the occurrence of the resurrection does become enormously more likely. Yes, indeed. Christianity has been experienced as true by millions of people. Relationships have been transformed. In a few weeks, I'll be in Israel. Palestinians and Israelis sitting together in worship, giving each other hugs. People who never would have talked before, lives completely transformed. And I can give you many examples like that. Christianity is rational because it answers the basic questions of life. Origin and destiny. Where are we coming from? Where are we going? Meaning and purpose. What is life about? Morality and ethics. How do we become virtuous as people? How do we treat others? It answers those questions of meaning, of relationship, and so forth. When Paul was defending himself, it wasn't a debate, but he was on trial in a sense. He was interrupted by a Roman named Festus. And Festus said, Paul, you're too smart for yourself. Your learning has made you insane. You've become irrational. Paul says, I am not insane, most excellent Festus. What I am saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I'm convinced that none of this has escaped his notice because it was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do. Then the king Agrippa said to Paul, do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? Or some versions, in such a short time you will persuade me to be a Christian. Paul was not afraid to defend his faith because he believed it was rational. Well, this could be our experience as well. And I say, in closing, this could be your experience too, Robert, of course, if you were convinced. I agree with you completely. To be required to say the words of a Christian creed that was not in your heart is the very epitome of the irrational. And you share about this in one of your website articles. I'm with you completely. And I tell seekers, do not go to any religious meeting, don't go to any church where they say, don't ask questions, don't disturb us, just believe. That's wrong. It's wrong to try to force anyone to believe something without facts. That we certainly both agree on. Yet there's ample evidence that Jesus lived an extraordinary life, that his teachings were radically new, that he was executed, and that so many people believed he was raised from the dead and experienced something that his impact was enormous in his time and in his world. Let's investigate with an open mind. In fact, I would go further as a Christian preacher. Once we see the evidence, if we still have a problem, if we still have difficulty believing it, remember this. So often, people reject the Bible not because it contradicts itself. People reject the Bible because it contradicts them.
Thank you.
Hello. When I heard this topic, is Christianity rational or irrational, I thought it's an interesting topic because I didn't know actually whether I will agree or disagree with my opponent. So to what extent it will be a debate. I've been before debating things like does God exist, and then it's more clear what atheists and Christians think on such topics. So indeed, it seems there is some agreement on various things with me and Douglas, and that's a nice thing. There's some agreement, there's some disagreement, so there's fruitful possibilities for debate. There are, first of course, very many variations of Christianity. So when we ask whether Christianity is rational, it really depends, which brand of Christianity are we talking? Are we talking of some US Bible Belt fundamentalism? Are we talking of some Italian Catholic person? Are we talking of this Finnish ultra-liberal priest who thinks that everybody gets to heaven? It's really a matter of style. And different branches of Christianity and even different people in these branches, we might say that they have various degrees of rationality and irrationality. And we might even say that a Christian person and even atheist person might have some beliefs that he believes rationally with some reason and evidence, and some other topics or points or beliefs that he believes in an irrational way, and that's fine. So there can be one axis in believers can be this creationists and non-creationists. I've been just learning that Douglas is not a creationist, whereas in USA we have many creationists, and then creationists are further split into young earth creationists who think that Earth is 6,000 years old, and then there's the old Earth creationists who think the Earth is older, but still God created all the species. So there's very many different kind of beliefs inside Christianity and various degrees to which people associate rationality there. There are some believers, I've heard many liberal believers especially, who say, my belief is irrational and it should be irrational, and that's how faith should be. And that's one point of view. And then there are believers like Jehovah's Witnesses, who come to your door and they claim that for every claim they make, every sentence, they have full arguments, full evidence, and whatever you ask them, they will have an answer. They will never say, oh, that's a mystery, that's irrational, that's mysterious, our ways of God. Unfortunately, it seems to me that many Christians seem to have this kind of double standard. When there are some arguments or some evidence that they think is supporting their faith, then they are very willing to use that argument, are very willing to use that evidence. But when there's some other argument or other evidence that is somehow turning against their faith, then they say, oh, but my belief is irrational and mysterious are God's ways and so on. And I think this kind of double standard is a bit like intellectual dishonesty. It's not really the true skeptics or the true seekers' way towards truth. Then we can ask whether what's the Bible's view on rationality in Christianity and faith. In the letter to Corinthians, Paul writes, Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with wisdom and eloquence, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. So this implies that Paul did not have the idea that rational thinking would have very high meaning or high value when people are considering whether God exists or whether Jesus arose. In Matthew, Jesus is quoted saying himself, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He caught a little child and had him stand among them. And he said, "I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Now, we know from our experience that when we were children, we could easily believe rather weird things. If our parents were to fool us and say the moon is cheese, and the clouds are candy, we might not be thinking very rationally of it. We might trust it by the authority and believe it. So for Jesus to say that you should believe in the way a child does, I think that's really giving the message against rationality in making your faith. Now, not everything needs to be rational in this world, like I said. Sometimes I hear Christians saying, oh, atheists just want to apply reason to everything and, they are just this kind of machines or whatever. But there's many other aspects in life where rationality does not apply validly. For example, emotions. If I have feelings of love towards somebody, that's not a rational thing. There's no rational argument, that will justify that love. It's an emotion, and it's in completely this different sphere of existence. Some music, yeah. Also, moral judgments. If we are making some moral decisions, thinking what is right, what is wrong, we can use our rationality to find the building blocks. If we are thinking whether we should build, more nuclear power stations or what, that's a moral and political decision. And we can use facts and we can use logic to give sort of building blocks for our decision. But the final decision, the final moral decision, what is good and what is wrong, what do I want to do, there must be emotions, irrational emotions involved. If we make computers or robots that are fully rational and have all the knowledge in the world, they will not do any moral decisions. They will not do any decisions at all because decisions come from emotion. An example is the beauty of the rainbow. Now, I'm a scientist for my training, and still if I see a nice rainbow, in evening light, I can enjoy the beauty of the rainbow and I can, enjoy the magnificence of the universe, even though I know it's, just sunlight reflecting with these physical properties from these droplets of water. I can understand it on the physical level, and I can still understand it on the emotional and artistic level, and that's fine. So there's different claims. We can talk of what are the claims of beauty, what are the claims of emotion, but then there are claims of truth. There are the claims of fact. For example, is there a God who is listening to our prayers? That's a statement of fact. That's a statement about the universe. And indeed, just like Douglas said, we should be seeking for objective answers, or as objective as possible answers to those questions. And in those questions, rational thinking is needed. Still, even in those questions, whether Jesus was Son of God, whatever that means, in those questions, although they are claims of fact, still many people do not use rational thinking to arrive to some conclusion there. And that can be fine as well. If somebody, if there's an old person, and he wants to irrationally believe, without good arguments, that there is Heavenly Father, and when she dies, she will go to heaven, and she will see all her dead relatives. If she wants to believe that emotionally, for emotional reasons, not for rational reasons, that's okay. I have only disagreement when somebody is saying, there's this, rational reasons for believing in something, and then the rational reasons are not valid in the end. So it's fine for me, everybody can believe what they want, but if you believe something because you want to believe it, because it's emotionally satisfying, be aware for these reasons of belief. It's too common for believers of all sorts to come to the belief by some kind of emotional, spiritual experience, completely irrational experience, and only afterwards they start to gather and find some rational reasons, why what they are believing is true. But then they have been committing fallacy already. Because if you are searching for truth, from blank paper, from, really honest point of view, then you shouldn't first come to some conclusion and then start to search evidence for that. You should, every moment, every day, you should challenge your existing beliefs. It's also very natural for humans to stick to their original beliefs, however they have been coming to those, whatever happens. That is why in many religions there is special focus on indoctrinating small children to the religion. Because if as a child you come to believe something, then later in your life, even if you are presented with evidence against that, you have very strong psychological tendency to stick to this original belief. And you might not remember what arguments were given to you when you were a child for this belief. There might have not been even any arguments at all, but still you will resist the change very much. So we are very much inclined to believe what we have heard first. And because of that, it's, again, if we want to strive towards truth in an honest way, we should be questioning really our oldest and most cherished beliefs first. It is also very natural for humans to try to force some kind of explanation for things that they do not understand. For people in the Stone Age, when they were watching some thunderstorm and there were lightning striking down, they had no clue. They didn't know anything about electricity or weather or science. They had no clue what this lightning was. But still, primitively, they had very strong urge to explain it, what it is. And it's very understandable and very natural that some of them invented, it's the god of thunder throwing some, sticks from the sky. And that's fine. But today, we know better, but we can still have these gaps in knowledge. We don't know for sure. Science has not been answered all the questions. We don't know for sure where the universe, came about in the very, very, very beginning. We haven't fully understood how the consciousness works in the human brain. So there are unknown questions, and the tendency to think, we don't know it, so God did it, is very strong psychological tendency. So if we want to be skeptical and we want to strive towards truth in an honest way, we should be careful of this tendency as well. Regarding what rationality implies, what it means to be thinking rationally, I think to some degree we probably agree with what Douglas said already. Evidence is needed, but not any kind of evidence. In religions, it's too often the case that anecdotal evidence, old stories, are being offered as evidence. But we can again use this kind of metaphor for court of law. Which kind of evidence would pass in court of law for evidence that some crime has been happening? We would not really believe if there would be some, stories of stories from hundreds of years ago as evidence in court of law. in addition to evidence, there is also this need for simplicity of explanations. This means if we have an explanation that is, for example, supernatural, an explanation that is natural, then history has shown that the natural explanation tends to be more likely to be true. There are several cases in history where people have not been knowing something and supernatural explanations have been offered. And only later we have been finding a natural explanation. There's zero case in the history where some supernatural explanation has been offered for something and it has been proved beyond doubt that it is really caused by some supernatural agent. Supernatural explanations are usually just saying, oh, we don't know. We are admitting our ignorance by saying something like, God did it. So, how to find what claims are true? Another important thing to understand is it's very easy to be mistaken. And we know it's very easy to be mistaken because there are so many religions and so many beliefs that might be irrational, might be rational, but are nevertheless in contradiction with each other. And still, all the believers of those contradictory beliefs can be, fully convinced that they are right and the others are wrong. But just even without any evidence, even with just simple logic, we can see that most of them must be wrong, which means it's very easy to be mistaken, especially in matters of religion, which means one must be very careful.
Thank you. Okay. It's time for first cross-examination. And are you happy to stand next to each other there? And you can...
Okay.
It's good to share. Thank you for your stimulating encouragement. I found myself agreeing with many things you said. For example, the selective use of evidence, excessively relying on anecdote, and so forth. In the beginning, you implied that Christianity may be irrational because there are a lot of crazy religious groups doing things in the name of Christ. I wanted to know how much you really believe that. You would agree that many atheists have never thought through their position adequately. Is that right?
I don't remember saying in my speech that many Christians would be doing weird things in the name of their belief. What do you mean?
Well, you were talking about a spectrum of Christian beliefs, and
yes,
you mentioned Jehovah's Witnesses and others, and that made me think of, atheists are all different kinds too. Some have thought things through, but
absolutely, I can agree on that. I'm a member in the Finnish Freethinkers, and if you look at the history of atheism and, for example, the history of communism and Soviet Union, you can see that there have been times, and even today, but especially in the past, there have been many people who have been atheists not for rational reasons, but for reasons of politics and dogma. And I couldn't disagree with such status more. I think it can be equally, ununderstandable to be atheist, for the bad reasons than to be believer for bad reasons.
Well, this is the reason that I was talking about Christianity more in its original form. What we can know about this man, Jesus of Nazareth, what his distinctive teachings were, and some reasons in terms of probability, plausibility, why it actually makes sense. So do you think that Christianity in the original sense, the New Testament sense, is rational, or are you criticizing more what it's become, this crazy spectrum of thousands of competing groups?
Well, those Bible passages I read were from New Testament, and they were implying that, in my opinion, that believers should not be very critical, and they should take, what the New Testament says and what Jesus says, really, just to accept it by blind faith almost, and otherwise they will go to hell. And if they believe it, they will go to heaven. So it's more like coercion than rational argumentation, I would say there.
Well, there's no doubt that a lot of people in the name of Christ have behaved even worse than you're suggesting. Later in the rebuttal period, I'd like to come back to this point, but maybe for right now just to ask you what you think about Hebrews 11:1. That's a verse that says faith is evidence of things not seen, that faith involves a certainty. I mean, there's a trust side, which maybe includes the invisible, but faith is also a way of seeing, as I understand the New Testament. And so faith is evidence of things not seen, not as anti-intellectual as you seem to be saying.
Well, if you are seeing something, let's say with the eye of your heart, you have some kind of religious vision, or you hear the voice of God or something like that, that can be powerful evidence for you personally. But to establish the truth of your religion, it's really no much evidence at all, because people of all faiths that are completely contradictory are hearing these kind of things, and they are completely rational psychological explanations for these kind of visions and voices.
Like it could be schizophrenia, or it could be a deception,
No.
like the oracle at Delphi.
I wouldn't say. I think, the problem with many people is that they don't know how common hallucinations are with just normal people. There's, for example, this concept of hypnagogic hallucination, which means waking dreams. So some people, before falling asleep and before waking up, they will have this kind of dreamlike state where they think they are awake, but they can have hallucinations. And many people think, oh, I must be crazy, or then it was the alien or the voice of God or whatever, they fit there. So when one understands that hallucinations are really normal, then you don't have to say that the people are liars or they are crazy or anything like that.
I like the way you put that. And certainly there have been thousands or millions of visions people have had. So like you, I would explain away all of them. Oh, maybe nearly all of them. Since you took us to 1 Corinthians, in chapter 15 it talks about that appearance of the resurrected Jesus to 500, most of whom are still alive. It's in 1 Corinthians 15. These kinds of visions, hallucinations don't happen on a level including hundreds of people. Isn't that a weakness in your comment?
Well, again, the New Testament books have not been necessarily written as accounts of really, what the authors were believing was the case, but to a great, part as tools for prophetizing and tools for converting people. And if we look at these appearances of Jesus after crucifixion in the Gospels, it is very interesting that the original version of the Mark, which is the oldest and first of the Gospels, there's absolutely no mention of Jesus after, the killing of Jesus at all. And only later when we go to the later Gospels and decades pass, then more and more details suddenly appear to these Gospels. And I think that implies that they are mostly invented, because if there would have been really all these appearances, probably the earliest Gospel would have most information about them.
That sounds plausible. It's interesting. I finished reading the Gospel of Mark in Greek this morning. And, of course, the Gospel seems to end in verse 8. Verses 9 to 22 are quoted in the 2nd century. They may be authentic, but they certainly aren't original. And there's at least one alternate reading. And yet earlier, Jesus predicts he'll rise from the dead. But New Testament scholars, even though they agree Mark is probably the oldest gospel, there's a minority who say John is, but they're the minority. New Testament scholars don't believe that that's the oldest written source referring to Jesus' death. They believe that that's actually from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where Paul was baptized probably in the year 32 or 33 AD, 3 years after the church began. And he says that he passed on what he received, that Christ was crucified according to the Scriptures, he was buried, he was raised according to the Scriptures, then he appeared to a lot of people, some of whom weren't so positively disposed. And that's an earlier level of tradition which predates the Gospel of Mark by at least 10 years. And so I would reject the idea that the stories of his appearance are later, or that they were created, as some scholars used to say, 2nd century, the skeptics. But it's actually in the oldest level of the New Testament, but it's also in in the words of Jesus, saying he would come back. What do you say?
Yeah, I do know that Mark is believed to be later from the Paul's letters, but then again, if the Paul's letters, if the information there would have been widely understood and believed to be true and reliable, then probably Mark would have been include that as well. So indeed, Paul is writing about oral tradition that had been passing from person to person many times, so the reliability of this tradition is low. Regarding the returning of Jesus, he said that he would return before the last one of his disciples would die away, and in 2,000 plus years, that's been a bit awaited.
Okay, well that's very interesting. Jesus said in Mark 13, if we're talking about Mark, that in that generation, the Son of Man would come, the temple would be destroyed. That's an example of apocalyptic literature. I certainly don't take that literally. That would be the wrong way to take apocalyptic literature. So I would say he did come back. He came back in the year 70, metaphorically through the Roman armies. And the Christians who preserved the books of the New Testament, I don't think they were stupid. I don't think they thought that, oh, it's a failed prediction, but let's keep it anyway out of respect.
Well, we can see in some of Paul's letters, actually, he is speaking to the early members of the congregation who are actually getting worried about the fact that the oldest, disciples are now dying, and nothing has been happening. So definitely, absolutely, the first members of the church did believe and take Jesus literally, that he would be returning in few decades, and they were very worried when that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually not aware of any passage where Jesus said he'd be coming back in a few decades. The idea the Lord is near, we should be ready at any time, the Son of Man comes like a thief, that's very different to saying that he prophesied he would be coming in a few decades. I certainly cannot agree with that. But I believe we're out of time, or I am. My 10 minutes is gone.
We're going to have the second cross-examination, and this time it's 4 minutes each speaker, and Douglas will begin.
And Robert not going to cross-examine me?
Was that the whole time for the cross-examination?
I thought it was 10 minutes each on the plan.
Did
yes.
you now use 20 minutes already?
No, that was 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you will get 10 minutes to cross-examine
It's got to be
Douglas.
fair.
Okay.
It's got to be fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you said you believe Jesus is God in flesh. I have never really understood, what does that mean? How would you explain, in rational terms, what does mean God in flesh, and whether God and Jesus is the same or different, or all these weird things?
Well, I think we can explain aspects of the faith reasonably, but to say explain God in the flesh rationally, if I understand you, it's like explain God rationally in words. Here's a piece of paper, explain it in words, use both sides of paper if necessary. This is where I do say there is an element of mystery. I don't know, except in mathematics, I don't even really know what infinity means. But if God's infinitely beyond us, there's no level of rational explanation that would convince someone who doesn't want to believe. Now, God becoming a human, the incarnation, is something that's prophesied in the Old Testament. It's something that Jesus claimed. And it's a fact he alluded to, and it's something his earliest followers believed. And there are many explicit statements in the New Testament that say he is God, like John 1:1, Romans 9:5, Titus 2:11-14, 2 Peter 1:1, Hebrews 1:8, and others.
The core, message that is said to be in the New Testament is that Jesus died for our sins. Now, I've always had trouble, trying to rationally understand what that even means, because the closest, thing I can think of is that there's this weird, powerful king, and he's very annoyed with his, subordinates, who have been breaking his will, and he decides that although he's all powerful, he must kill his own son in a cruel way to forgive his own people. I don't think that makes any sense.
I don't think that makes any sense either. And there are a lot of Christians who take the ransom terminology of the New Testament, this idea that we've been kidnapped because of our sin, we're hostages, and Jesus pays the ransom money to his Father, and now God's okay again, which creates a division between God and man. Christians normally believe in an evil power as well. And the earliest Christians believed that ransom was actually paid to the enemy. The ransom was paid to the kidnapper. The ransom was actually paid to the devil. But let me answer this a different way, more existentially. Part of our human condition is confusion about who we are, our identity. Is there meaning? Do we have a purpose? Or are we just some kind of accident? And another part of the human condition is alienation. When I'm not doing well with my wife, when there's tension, when there's a problem between us, it's not a good feeling. And I can function, I can keep going, but it's not nice when it's between two people. The Scriptures, Old and New Testament both, even from those earliest symbolic chapters of Genesis, like Genesis 3, this game in the garden, speak of an alienation between God and man. This is something that we could talk about rationally or irrationally. It's also something that we can feel, something that we can experience. And I'm personally convinced that many non-believers in the quiet moments late at night know that something is wrong, not only with the world, but there's something wrong even in their own lives. And I think that the Christian explanation as a solution to our sin, to the alienation, even to the confusion about identity, is actually the most rational explanation I've found in any religion that I've studied.
So tell me again, what was your explanation that I'm feeling bad in the evening?
Well,
a rational explanation.
I cannot speak for you,
Yeah.
but I'm talking about many atheists I've talked to.
Okay.
It seems to me they may accuse Christians. You talked about the caveman, the Stone Age man, the thunder. Oh, there must be something up there. How do we know that the atheists aren't doing the same thing, and that they've had some very negative experience with authorities in their lives, usually the mother or the father, and then they've projected, whereas most humans in most of history have believed there's a God, atheists will say no. And I cannot speak in your case, but I usually ask the atheist, what was your relationship like with your father? If it was an angry, unpleasant relationship, they tend to view God as being harsh, as penalizing, as being arbitrary. They don't want to know him. If their father wasn't there, perhaps he abandoned the mother or he died when the child was young, they have a hard time believing in a heavenly father because they didn't have that experience with the earthly father. And I'm not trying to tread too personally here, but I found in my discussions that's the case. That's a fact for many men and women. And where there's a more natural or sustained relationship with their earthly father, it's the most natural thing in the world to believe there's a Father in heaven.
Yeah, like I said earlier, there are many natural psychological mechanisms, that make belief so common and so accessible. And indeed, it is true that to this kind of heavenly Father, we are projecting, our relationships with other humans. So the atheist view would be that, God didn't create humans in his image, but people created God in their own image in this kind of anthropomorphic way. There are, of course, indeed different views of God, and to say that atheist has some kind of view of God is perhaps a bit confusing, because I don't think any kind of God exists. But on the other hand, I do know there are many kind of Christians that some believe in that kind of God and some believe in this kind of God. So I try to discuss all the possibilities. Still regarding this stuff is wrong. There might be bad reasons for atheists to believe what they believe, and that has been handled. But coming back to this Jesus dying, so you said for you it makes also no sense that God would have to kill his son to forgive his children. You said it makes no sense. Does it mean it's irrational?
Well, the way you described it was a caricature of what the Bible says.
Yes.
I don't believe the idea of one person sacrificing his life for another is necessarily irrational. There's a penalty for sin. I mean, all the Old Testament passages, the death of the innocent is required to deal with the sin. Now, if you don't think sin is a real thing, then there's nothing to be forgiven. But I was saying, in terms of existential experience, I experience that sin is a very real thing, and it needs a solution. And I think forgiveness through Christ is much better than dealing with it through alcohol or drugs or joining a new club. People have to deal with the alienation in their own lives.
Yeah, again, regarding sin, yes, people have bad feelings, and I'm quite sure many people try to dispel or comfort the bad feelings through religion, and that's fine, and that's irrational, and that's fine.
No, why would it be irrational?
Because it's about feelings. The very thing about feelings, like I said.
Are feelings irrational?
Yeah, exactly. They are. If I'm feeling love, there's no evidence, there's no logic there. It's just a plain feeling. If I feel beauty of the rainbow, that's outside the scope of rational thought. Is about finding what is true, using logic and such. It doesn't apply to emotions.
Are you confusing empirical thought with rational thought? Anyway, empirically, a scientist has nothing to say about what justice is or what love is or, wow, that's beautiful. But we can talk about these things rationally. We just can't talk about them empirically. You can't prove there's a God. That doesn't mean it's irrational if you have reasons to believe there's a God. Empirical is not a synonym for rationality. Otherwise, you're assuming metaphysical naturalism. This is not right. I'm with you on metaphysical methodology, but metaphysical naturalism, no. How do you know that?
Yeah, of course, it's true in a sense that we can talk of emotions in a rational way. There's a science, rational science of psychology that is discussing emotions, but the emotions themselves, when I'm feeling them, that is not part of my rational thought process. That's the point.
Well, certainly they're very slippery things, emotions. They can make us do irrational things. But feelings come from somewhere. If I speak unkind words to my wife and she reacts a certain way, a third party can look at this very objectively and understand what's happening. So I disagree. I think emotions do fall into the category of the rational, except we have to be very careful. We have to be careful the way that you suggested we need to in order to maintain objectivity in your opening statement. I agreed with that.
And you mentioned that there's some aspect of mystery and this unknown of infinity you were still referring to. Doesn't that imply, if you cannot even understand something and still you claim you believe in it, I cannot, in order to believe, for me to believe in something, I would have to first understand it. If I say there's this blah, 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 some kind of mystery, understandable thing.
Time is up.
I cannot even say I believe in it.
Time is up. Time for second cross-examination. So, Douglas, turn. 4 minutes each.
Should I go on this side?
Okay.
Something about the right side and the left side?
Yeah.
But is it
You can
audience
start.
right or is it stage right?
Yeah.
Or is it stage fright? I don't know. So who do you think Jesus was? We're talking about his Christianity rational. You've not said much about Christ. What would you say about that?
Jesus was one of the many people of the time, of his time, who were becoming prophets. And he was just a particularly successful prophet, but there have been very similar prophets before him and many similar prophets after him who have been all claiming that they are messengers of God, and there are stories about them performing miracles, and there are stories about them being resurrected. The history is full of more or less forgotten prophets. Where
Can you name one? Can you be specific?
Well, John the Baptist, for example, is one prophet who...
Well, you said prophets who did miracles. The New Testament says John did no miracles at all. Luke, it says that in John 10:15. But someone who claimed to be a prophet who did miracles, you said some of them rose from the dead. I'm just saying, can you name one?
Okay, let's try Apollonius of Tyana. Have you heard of him?
Apollonius of Tyana, but that's long after the time of Christ.
Absolutely. So what, his life, like I said, before the life of Jesus and after the life of Jesus, even today there are people who claim to be prophets and claim to have some miracle powers and claim to be healing people. So it's a continuous tradition from early ancient times to today to have these miracle men who are speaking the words of God.
I think it's widely agreed by scholars that the source in which the account of Apollonius of Tyana appears is a piece of political propaganda. It's long after the time of Christ. There's a political agenda. I know you don't believe it's true, and you know I don't believe it's true. Can we find a better example?
I think that example is still good because we can also understand that most of the New Testament texts are political propaganda that are based on, oral tradition, but really not written in order to preserve the history in maximal way, but written to convince people of this particular political religious point. But from the further history, we can say many Greek, mythologists, like Osiris, Hercules, such characters. There was this kind of virgin birth, having disciples, being
crucified,
maybe crucified, maybe rising. So all these standard aspects, that have been given as evidence of Jesus' status, they had been associated with many people, and they had to be associated with Jesus by the gospel writers in order to make it believable.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. I would call it parallelomania. I don't know how many people in the audience saw the film Zeitgeist. It was that internet film that had tens of millions of views in the first 2 weeks, which basically said that the story of Jesus' life, his virgin birth, his... are you cheating? Are you going online? No. That his resurrection was all borrowed from other religions, which is simply not true. I know of no evidence for a dying, rising God before the time of Jesus. I know accounts of these that come after. Let me just give a couple quick examples. Often they'll say, well, the virgin birth was common. Horus, that's not a virgin birth because his mother Isis wasn't a virgin. Attis was born when the god Zeus spilled his seed on top of a mountain. I don't think that works. Krishna's mother had 7 children before him. Krishna wasn't crucified. He was shot in the heel by an arrow. Attis castrated himself and he bled to death. That's not a crucifixion.
Douglas, time is up. Robert Stern, 4 minutes.
Yeah, I think we could just combine these times because both are commenting and asking questions, but no problem.
Thank you.
I will continue shortly there with the regarding the Jesus, particular properties. There's another internet movie called Incredible Shrinking Son of Man by
Robert Price.
Yeah, also a book, and that's giving quite good summary of all these, sort of mythological and half mythological, people and beings before Jesus, where some of these aspects have been associated. Well, we can of course say, none of them were exactly like Jesus, and that's true. But we should also remember that in the medieval times, people were actually, normal Christians were worried and asking, the priests, why is it so that, Jesus is so much like this Osiris and Isis and Horus and Adonis and Mithra, and why are they so similar? And the explanation, which we can consider whether it's rational or not, of some church father was that devil had been going back in time to implant this kind of false evidence to fool, believers. So that's some rational explanation for you.
You want me to respond to that?
You can respond to that.
Yeah, I read Price's book, The Incredible Shrinking Son of Man, and we actually had a debate 2 years ago. Price is a member of the Jesus Seminar. He described himself as a Christian atheist. I wasn't convinced by his so-called parallels, and he's been criticized by other New Testament scholars for not playing by the rules at all. He gives a couple of examples. I remember he talked about Hanina Bendosa. He talked about Honi the circle drawer, a man whose name sounds so ridiculous. The point is just to make people laugh at Jesus. Honi drew a circle and said, he was a rabbi, I'm not going to leave the circle until it rains. And eventually it rained, and so this is a miracle, and so that's like Jesus. That's the kind of example Price gives in his book to show that Jesus was not unique. Read the Gospels again, Robert. It's not the same.
I read those.
Again.
Yeah, again. Yeah. There's also a good book by Randall Helms called Gospel Fictions, which deals with this and has these parallels there as well. But coming to the next point, I was mentioning that we can be mistaken, and actually it's very psychologically plausible for humans to be mistaken. There are very powerful mechanisms like belief in authority and willing to emotional reasons that cause us to be mistaken. Now, do you think you might be mistaken in your belief in Jesus and God? And if so, what might be the probability that you are mistaken?
Well, I think you ask a fair question. Yes, of course there's a possibility I'm mistaken. Just as I hope that you would admit there's a possibility that you're mistaken. And then you use the word probability because it really does come down to the weight of evidence.
Absolutely.
Is it easier to believe in a God or is it easier not to believe in a God? Based on my life experience, it would be harder for me not to believe in a God because of the answers to these basic questions of identity and destiny and origin and so forth. Even there being a right and wrong. I don't see how there can be right and wrong if there's no God. It actually would be fairly irrational to make those claims. So I could be wrong. I've certainly changed my mind on many things. I've never actually been in your position. I've never been an atheist. I'll be very disappointed if you're right. But I admit, of course, there's a chance. I think it's a small chance because I've experienced God working in my life. And maybe you've not experienced God working in your life.
Time is up. Time is up. It's time for rebuttal.
Okay.
5 minutes each.
Who's first?
Douglas first.
Okay, rebuttal. I promised, Robert, I would come back to this thing about 1 Corinthians. You were quoting from 1 Corinthians 1:17 where Paul says, Christ sent me not to baptize, he sent me to preach the gospel, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. And you seem to be interpreting that in an anti-intellectual way. I just don't think that works. I think you've misunderstood Jesus and Paul and probably the Old Testament too. I'll give it to you. In chapter 8, Paul does say, knowledge puffs up. It gives us the big head and love builds up. I'm not sure I would call that anti-intellectual though. That's more being elitist or being kind of arrogant. Paul asked them to make a determination in church discipline, chapter 5. He appeals to them to reason and settle disputes in the church, chapter 6. In chapter 12, he alludes to their irrational past when they were part of pagan religions and they were led astray to dumb idols. He was very aware of the difference between rational faith and irrational faith. You said Jesus says we need to become like children. Well, it's widely agreed this is a passage about humility. It's not a passage about becoming immature or not using our thinking. Jesus said, and we find that in Matthew, later in Matthew, he says, you are in error. He's speaking to the Sadducees, Matthew 22:29. You're in error because you don't know the Scriptures and you don't know the power of God. Now, you may call the second part irrational, you don't know the power of God, but the first part, you don't know the Scriptures. There's a constant appeal to people to study the Scriptures and follow. When Paul taught Christianity in the Greek or Macedonian city of Berea in Acts 17, he reasoned with them, as he did in chapter 14. And those who studied and read and asked questions were commended. In the Old Testament, the fifth book of Moses, so-called, Deuteronomy 6, says that we're to love God with everything we have. When Jesus talks about this in Matthew 22 and also in Mark 12, we're to love God not only with all of our heart, but also with all of our mind. And so, although Christianity is not like the mystery religions, just believe, it acknowledges mystery, Christianity is not a religion that appeals to us just to check our brains at the door. As I heard one teacher say, just flush your brain down the toilet. You don't need it. Or I read one book written by some Holy Spirit group. Put your brain in a box and shoot it to the moon because it'll just get in the way. Or some tongue speaker who said, put your brain in neutral, put your tongue in high gear and step on the gas. This is not right. This leads to all kinds of craziness. There's a tremendous appeal to be rational, and there's a focus in both Testaments that Christianity, in fact, is rational. And so I think you're simply mistaken there. The point is to be humble and not to let our knowledge get in our way, because sometimes smart people can let their brain get in their way. Evidence as in a court of law. I like that. We talk about forensics. When I watch television, the shows I've watched, and I don't know what time they might be on or what channels in Helsinki, but there's one called CSI, and there's NCIS, and it's these very impressive laboratories. I would love to visit one. And they have all this evidence. It would be nice if we had a video of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. We don't have that. I'm not sure in our day that it would be impressive anyway. We would say, there's a trick. I don't think we would believe that. And Jesus himself suggested we wouldn't believe it if we saw it. Luke 16:31. We wouldn't believe it if we weren't disposed to believe it. And yet I think you're right. We do need to consider the evidence as a whole. It is like a court of law. A court of law seldom has the video. It seldom has 500 independent and corroborating accounts. Witnesses are cross-examined. People listen. They discuss. There's a heavy emphasis on rationality. And yet, I don't think you would say any verdict rendered by a court is bogus. We never know if someone's innocent or guilty. We say, with a high degree of probability, that man murdered his wife. We could be wrong. Maybe there'll be further evidence later, but for now, this is what we see. Or, this woman did not do what they said she did. She did not commit bank fraud. The evidence is not there. She was set up. She was framed. And so we may not have 100% certainty, but we reach a certainty beyond reasonable doubt. And I believe that's very much the way it is with Christianity. It's an appeal to think and not to rush, and certainly not to sign your name on a document you haven't read or say the creed, as someone tried to make you do when you were a boy, that you didn't believe. I admire you for refusing to. I admire you for saying, I'm not going to just say I believe it when I don't. I think that's very wrong, and I'm against brainwashing too, although I think influence is positive.
Time is up.
Well, thank you for listening to me. Now it's my turn.
Yeah, indeed, I must reiterate that there are aspects regarding skepticism and needing to think that we do agree with Douglas. Indeed, it's true that he might be mistaken, and it's indeed true that I might be mistaken, and the evidence must be weighted against. And also, we might both be mistaken, and something completely different might be. So we shouldn't commit this kind of fallacy of false dichotomy, like saying, either God exists or it doesn't, just choose 50-50, That's false as well. Still, I think it's telling that, when Douglas, had to answer like he still doesn't think, he's quite sure he's right because how God has been acting in his life. So still it seems to me his strongest evidence, is not coming from, what, Bible says and what, kind of historical evidence there is and what kind of rational evidence there is. It seems to me his strongest thing is these personal experiences of God, and I would say that's more or less irrational. And then only later you can dig up some stuff, to try to support that. The question is, of course, if there is good, solid evidence for God, why isn't there even better? Why isn't there so good evidence that we wouldn't be having this debate here? We know nowadays that there's this Atlantic Ocean and Tarja Halonen is the president of Finland. Why don't we have that kind of evidence, for God? It's all this kind of, fleeting, stories of miracles that seem to disappear somewhere, when you look more close, and some old documents and stories that, most historians don't agree, and these conflicting different religions. The evidence, you might claim the evidence is there, but if there is an all-powerful God, why isn't there much more evidence? Doug was saying that, he thinks it was a good idea for God to send, Jesus to communicate with us. I think if he would have been just having thundering voice all over the world from the skies, let's say every Sunday 2:00, that would be much more convincing way for God to speak with us. Or let's say I would be praying to God, and God would always answer to everybody with a clear voice in our heads. God could be speaking in that way. The fact that that never happens and the evidence is really flimsy, I think that's a very telling point. Also, I don't think, I agree with this, it's bad to throw away your brains. The most radical, example of that I saw when I was going to this Pentecostal church meeting here in Finland, just to see, what they are doing. And the point of the preacher was, if you have doubt, the doubt is from Satan. If you have doubt, kill the doubt. Doubt is from Satan. Just believe. So it's good we agree that's not the case. And if somebody in the audience thinks doubt is from Satan, hopefully not after this. Pagan religions and Christian religions, of course, pagan religions is just sort of a mocking way for Christianity to describe anything else. I see no major difference in the rationality of, let's say, Islam or Buddhism or Christianity from each other. They all have supernatural claims. They all have stories and written accounts of miracles and God people and moral examples. It's no more or less rational with that. Thank you.
Thank you. It's time for questions and answers. If you have questions, please write it on the card that was given. If you need a card or a pen, please lift your hand if you don't have. And if you have written a question, please bring it to the table, or you can give it to the person on the side, and they can... Okay, there are more? Marco, can you...
200 of them.
If you have questions, please... I see there's a question. Nico, can you bring it? Please bring your questions here. And we'll do it, both of them going to answer the question. And we're going to rotate. So the first one have 2 minutes. The second one has 1 minute. So, for example, it's Douglas first to answer. Then he has 2 minutes. And then Robert can continue for 1 minute. Okay.
And was it so that the question was supposed to be addressed to one of us, or just anything?
Well, I can see there are some that are addressed.
Okay.
So the one that are addressed, I think you can have 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Seems like 2 are addressed. Okay. There's one here addressed to Robert. So then Robert will have... Oh, yeah, you have the microphone there now. Robert, do you believe the Bible is authentic?
I think Bible is in some parts authentic and in some parts fiction, and there's all levels of gray between that. I don't think, for example, the creation story of the first book of Moses has any authenticity there. Regarding words that are attributed, for example, to Jesus. There's in USA, there's this group of scholars called the Jesus Seminar, and they had been making a version of the Bible where they had been trying to make best estimates with what probability different sayings of Jesus are actually sayings of Jesus. So there's levels like probably Jesus, most likely not Jesus, absolutely not Jesus, and biggest part is probably not Jesus, but there's probably something as well. So partly authentic, but for example, miracles, not authentic. First book of Moses, not authentic. And many parts of the Old Testament, New Testament, not authentic. Revelation of John, definitely, just hallucinations.
Okay, Douglas, 1 minute.
It's an example of apocalyptic literature, not hallucinations. The Jesus Seminar you referred to, and one of the authors you mentioned is a member of that, says that only 18% of the New Testament is authentic. They did this by counting with beads that were black or white or gray or pink, and this is a self-appointed group of scholars. They don't represent New Testament scholarship. Many of them are very extreme, very outside, and they use 5 Gospels. They even use the Gospel of Thomas, which is written about the year 180, long after the other Gospels. So I don't think that's right. The creation account was never meant to be taken as a scientific statement. If you're referring to Genesis 1, it has many marks of being poetic, but it tells us about God's power, His wisdom, and that He's in control, and that we occupy a special place in this universe. There are many creation accounts in the Bible, not just in Genesis 1 and 2, but they're also in Job and Psalms and Ecclesiastes. And last, as far as the miracles, well, of course, I reject most miracles.
Time is up.
Every religion claims them.
Time is up. The next question.
Normally they let you finish your sentence.
This one is not addressed. So Douglas will get 2 minutes and Robert 1 minute. Christianity has done a lots of good. What good has atheists done for the world? Well, no, that's Robert. Robert will get 2 minutes on that one.
I could do it, though.
Well, of course, atheism implies that you don't have a belief in God. But in all other respects, atheists can be having any other beliefs. They can be good or bad, whatever. So, atheism itself is not like a dogma or, sort of political project, that has some kind of aims and targets. So it's like saying, what good have, red-haired people done, for the world? Or atheists are non-believers, and they have been doing good things and they have been doing bad things, just like everybody else. So, to use some of my time, I could just point out that it's often said that Hitler was atheist and he was very bad, blah, blah, blah. But actually Hitler is himself writing that he believes he's, doing the work of Almighty God, when he's exterminating the Jews. So just to correct one thing.
Douglas.
Right. He was never officially kicked out of the Catholic Church, but his views are so unbiblical, I don't think anyone would seriously say he was a Christian. I think the evidence shows pretty strongly that most humanitarian relief, most care for the poor, for the sick, physically or mentally, most care for the starving, historically and today, comes from religious groups, far more than from non-religious groups or from governments. And so I would just say, I don't believe that an atheist cannot be a good person or an atheist can't do good things. Some Christians think that. I think that's silly. But most of the good that's done, if I understand the question, actually does come from religious groups. Probably Christians first, but some other groups too.
Okay, next one. We don't understand infinity, but we know it exists as other equations hang from it. The empirical evidence supports things around it infinity, but not the concept of infinity itself. Does this make mathematics illogical? If not, why doesn't same reasoning not apply to Christians?
Who are you talking to?
I don't know.
I didn't understand the question, so if Doug wants to say something.
Yeah, I think I did. I mean, I don't.
Okay, you speak 2
It's
minutes.
not so. Well, it's not so connected with is Christianity rational? But I was the one who made the comment about infinity. Infinity is a very useful concept in mathematics. I'm just saying, in the real world, some people think that the universe is infinitely old, but that couldn't be, because then we couldn't be where we are right now. We never would have got here. So in the real world, it's more of an abstraction. In mathematics, it's a very useful thing, and I know this is one of your strong areas, along with biology, chemistry, and physics, so maybe you want to add something to that.
Yeah, I agree that in the real world, I would say most scientists agree that infinity is a problematic concept, and most likely nature does not contain, infinities, in real, stuff, which of course, refutes also any kind of infinite God,
But God, you're talking about God, and I'm saying you can't talk about God empirically. So now we're jumping from the scientific, physical, the world of physics and infinity to something that's transcendent. Of course, if something is beyond, it's not contained inside. But that's a very clever jump, but that's not fair.
Please write the cards very clearly. And okay, question to Robert. According to the point of view of skeptics, is there a purpose of life? If yes, then how do you define it?
Again, this is something, skeptics and atheists, can certainly have different opinions about, and so I'm not representing any kind of, official position here. I think, there's no universal, huge, sort of supernatural meaning of all life. Life, as we know it, and humans as a species have been rising, through the process of evolution, and there has been no target. It could have been equally happened that the whole human race wouldn't exist. That could have happened, and for each of us individually, it could have happened that we didn't exist. There's no high purpose of life, but each and every person can create purposes for their own life, for their own goals, and their own task, and their own, what they value and what they like and what they find beautiful. These are small human-sized, meanings of life, but that's what I think can exist. And I've never understood also, when religions speak of this big meaning of life, what that would be even.
Which is another way of saying that if there's no God, there's no ultimate meaning. Just what you make for yourself right now. And this is very much against what Jesus taught, what Christianity teaches, that there is a God and there is a meaning to your life. You know that deep down, and you hope it's true, but the good news is the facts are on the side of your feelings. It actually is true. But if there's no God, there is no ultimate meaning. I'm not saying don't believe that because you'll be depressed, but the truth is, if that's right, the world is indeed very black, very bleak. There isn't really much there. If we're created by a God, ultimately, how we did it, through evolution or not, is irrelevant. But ultimately, if we come from God, we're created for relationship. First with Him, then with others.
Okay. I'm not sure the next who it is for. I think it's for Robert. Do you believe that there will be a judgment day, that the world will end one day?
No. Well,
do you believe that there will be a judgment day, that the world will end one day?
The short answer is no, and the long answer is that in all religions, but especially Christianity, there's been zillions of predictions of endings of the world and judgment days that have been failing miserably, and then the dates have been just postponed to some later dates. I do think, according to astronomy, in 5 billion years, the sun will explode and engulf, the current Earth. So the Earth will be destroyed in 5 billion years, but the universe will happily go on for billions and billions of years. And hopefully in 5 billion years, the human race has been expanded to other solar systems and other galaxies. So we don't have to care about the Earth being destroyed.
My short answer would be yes. I think we live in a moral universe where there are consequences to our actions, not just now, but even after. We are accountable for what we do. There is an authority. And when we go against that, when we go against our conscience, we feel bad for a reason, because we're actually doing something truly wrong, not just by social consensus, something truly wrong. The fact that many people predict the end of the world, I think, is really irrelevant. It has nothing to do with the question. The New Testament itself says don't predict. 1 Thessalonians 5:1 and 2, for example, Paul said don't even go there. Even as far as Jesus' prediction of the destruction of Jerusalem, which was 40 years later, 70 AD. In Matthew 24, Jesus said, at this time, I don't even know when it's going to be. Don't guess, just be ready.
Okay, this one is for Robert. Do you have
Everyone for Robert.
We
I mean, it's okay, but it wasn't the rules.
Yeah, then you get. Never mind.
The last word. Yeah. Okay.
Do you have any evidence that God doesn't exist?
The spaghetti monster.
Yeah, well, first of all, the burden of proof is on the side of the believer. Just like if I would say I have this, pink, hippopotamus in my living room, and I want you to believe it, but I'm not going to show you it, So I'm responsible for showing the evidence. So already asking like evidence for the non-existence of God is a fallacy. One should, by default, if there is not adequate evidence, for the existence of God, then by default, the probability is low, just like for any unicorns and dragons and whatever, magic creatures. But yes, there is still evidence against, existence of God as he is commonly believed to be. There's many studies, at least, for example, for God that listens prayers, there's many scientific studies that show that prayer actually does not work. It does not heal the sick. It has no effect. Then also there's, you can yourself, try, like Jesus said, if you have any belief, you can move mountains. Mountains have not been moved so far. Even in wars, people say that there's this saying, God tends to favor the bigger armies, So that side that has the bigger armies tends to win. So I don't see God. And then there's the problem of evil, if there's an all-powerful, all-good God, we shouldn't have all the unnecessary suffering that we have.
I mean, it sounds like we've changed the debate from is Christianity rational to is there a God? I agree with my opponent that you don't give evidence for there not being a God or for there not being a pink hippopotamus, but there's plenty of evidence for God. I wish you would listen to my debate with Michael Shermer, which is on this very fact. The fact that there's something instead of nothing, because scientists believe that from nothing comes this world. That's an amazing thought. We all believe in right and wrong. How can there be right and wrong? How could Hitler even be wrong if there is no ultimate right and wrong? Right and wrong, the problem of suffering and evil, is a real problem for believers. I don't think it's a problem for non-believers, because ultimately there is no right and wrong. They're just preferences, just things you like or you don't like. There are many reasons to believe that there is a God, but that's beyond my 60 seconds, and it's beyond the subject of this debate, I think.
I could answer some of those, but I know.
I know, but it's a different debate. So.
Okay. Still for Robert. If God would make his voice heard clearly every week, would you believe in him? Do you think there will still be a choice to believe or not? Don't you think it's more fair that your free will the way it is?
The fact that we have ample of existence that kangaroos exist, I don't think that is limiting my free will in any way. We have ample of evidence that horses exist, that we are sitting here in the auditorium. That's not limiting my free will in any way. If we would have ample evidence for God, that would not limit my free will in any way.
My wife and I lived in Australia twice, and I can confirm that kangaroos are very real. But if seeing them meant I felt I had no choice but to change my life, to always tell the truth, to be honest, not to commit sexual sin, not to murder. If the existence of kangaroos meant that I had to prepare for a day of judgment, then that would be a fair comparison. If God appeared to us empirically, I keep coming back to that word, that would very much affect our free will. My understanding of God, my experience of God, is that he's modest. He doesn't force himself on us. He gives us the choice. He respects our choice. And so to boom from heaven, you mentioned that before, that might be very effective, but it would dehumanize the very humans that he's trying to authenticate and help.
Okay. I'm struggling a little bit with the rest of the questions to read them. So if any of your question hasn't been answered, write a new one sentence, really clearly.
Shall we just have the next 5 questions to Douglas, whatever they are, and I will answer next?
It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's one more for Robert.
Are you sure we cannot do it?
It's okay.
If Robert does not believe in the judgment day, does he believe in the moral values written in the Bible?
Morals, like I said in the beginning, they are sort of partly rational and partly irrational. The morals arise from first us rationally thinking what are the results of our actions, and then the irrational part is using our emotions and our feelings, like to feel whether these consequences, feel right or wrong to us. I don't think morals or are coming in any way from any supernatural being any more than our feelings come. Our feelings are part of our brain processes, just like our thinking is part of our brain processes, and our morals have been developed in the course of evolution because we are social animals and we have been having to deal with being in groups with each other, and therefore this kind of let's say, moral emotions have been arising in that. And was that the question? What was exactly the question? Do I believe in morals? What?
The moral values written in the Bible.
Many of the moral values written in the Bible are, first of all, self-contradictory because, somewhere it's said that, you can kill your enemies, and somewhere it's said that, you shouldn't kill your enemies, you should, thank your enemies and turn your other cheek. So it's not clear what the moral values in the Bible are. Also, partly moral values of the Bible are moral values that are coming from much further, like this golden rule of supposedly Jesus, is coming already earlier from Confucius and others. So again, it's not clear that the moral values of the Bible are really, original in any way. But yes, there's obvious, things like don't kill, which, can be universal in the sense that's rather much hardwired to some of our emotions.
Just to say something about the contradiction, a difference is not necessarily a contradiction. Jesus, in his message, his Sermon on the Mount, Veris Predikam, said that in the past you were allowed to kill the enemy. It's changed now. The Old Testament says there will be a New Testament. In Jeremiah 31, it says it will change. And so there's a trajectory, there's a development. The standard becomes even higher under Jesus than it was before. As far as the golden rule, Matthew 7:12, you mentioned Kongse, Confucius. You could mention some of the famous rabbis, but I think that would normally be called the negative golden rule or the silver rule, because they said, don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. That's very different to what Jesus said. Actively do to others what you would like them to do to you.
Okay. Next one is for Douglas. How is Christianity more rational than Hinduism, Buddhism, or Scientology?
Now, if we're asking, we're talking about more truthful. As I said before, I think if you were brought up as a Hindu with Hindu experience, it might be rational to still be a Hindu, but it would be irrational once you saw the truth of God if you didn't change. So I think we're using the word maybe the wrong way. But Hinduism is full of mythology. It's predicated upon an impersonal world. This contradicts not only the teaching of people like Jesus, it contradicts every instinct in us. In Hinduism, eventually, after reincarnated enough times, our soul becomes part of the world soul. Atman is absorbed into Paramatman. So ultimately, there is no relationship, but all is one. In Buddhism, all is nothing. The central teaching of Buddhism is that there is no soul, that neither I nor Robert truly exists in any objective sense. Islam borrows heavily from Christianity and Judaism. It comes 600 years after Christianity. It's full of many different errors. I wrote a book on this. I can't share it all right now, but if rational means truthful, I think Christianity compares very well. I've studied all the world religions. I've studied the scriptures of almost all the world religions, and I would encourage you to do the same, because I think you'll very quickly see the qualitative difference between the Christian writings and teachings and those in the other man-made religions.
Yeah, of course, all world religions are more or less irrational. I would say Scientology is, absurdly irrational because it was invented by a science fiction writer, who was not selling books very well either. But, Hinduism, with this all is one, and Buddhism with all is nothing or whatever, in some sense, I might say even they might be more rational than having this kind of personal beginning in the beginning of the universe, because beginning of the universe, if we look at the Big Bang, and how complex things have been coming out from simpler and simpler things in the history of the universe, then the fact that we would be going simpler and simpler and simpler, it implies that in the end we had something infinitely simple, and then nothing at all. It does not imply that we would have some kind of, complex, weird God being.
Thank you.
I can't respond to that.
You can't, because I haven't been responding to your weird things.
Okay.
We could just continue on the
William Lake
debate.
Craig has something to say about that.
Yeah.
Kalam cosmological argument.
Okay, here we have one for both of you. And it's written in Finnish, so I will translate it. In Finnish it goes, mikä saa sinut eniten epäilemään omaa uskoasi siihen, mihin uskot? So what is the thing that mostly makes you doubt the thing you believe in now?
That most makes us doubt the thing we believe in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, you get the same time, both of you now. Both get 2 minutes.
Continuing from something I mentioned before about God being modest and not forcing us, sometimes I wish He would. Sometimes I wish He would just make it even easier. I'm a human being, like all of us. Sometimes I doubt myself. There can be insecurity. Sometimes I have a very busy life. I know Robert does as well. Sometimes I wake up, I don't even know what city I'm in. I don't even know what country I'm in. I think life itself can be very tiring, and fatigue can make it hard to believe. I think that's just the way it is. It's not a specific argument. If there was one argument, I would think it would be something about the problem of suffering. To believe that of the 7 billion people alive today, and who knows how many billion have already died, there's so much pain. It's not just there's so much pain, so few people are doing anything to help anybody else. And I know intellectually, if God could have done it a different way, He would have, but then we wouldn't be human because we wouldn't have free will. But that is hard. And I read a lot, I travel a lot, I think on these issues a lot. I think that's very challenging for faith, and it's very perplexing. And as I said before, I think for true believers, the problem of suffering is a real issue. And all the great people in the Bible struggle. They doubt. They begin, and they're tempted not to finish. They're afraid to take a stand. They argue with God. Think of Asaph. Think of Habakkuk. Think of Abraham. Think of Esther. Think of others. And so in that feeling of mine, it's part of the human condition. It doesn't hurt my faith. I think it helps it to be stronger. But I wish it were easier sometimes. Okay, your turn.
I will be mostly talking from my own point of view, so it's fair. Of course, this implies that there is something I believe, and I lack, that I would be doubting. So I will interpret this that what makes me doubt that there is, that the whole universe is natural, that there is nothing supernatural. That's how I think it is. What makes me doubt of that? I'm struggling to try to find, sort of rational arguments that I have heard that would make me doubt that. If I have to stretch my mind, it might be indeed something related to consciousness, because consciousness is still for science such a mystery. We understand neurons in the brain, and we understand that if the neurons die, then the thoughts go away as well. If you have demented person, then the personality starts to disappear. But still, we don't really understand, and there's this sort of sense that there must be some supernatural, thingy, they are producing the consciousness. But that might be what I would say. But on the irrational side, I would say of course, the fact that I don't believe in afterlife, for example, and I don't believe in afterlife of any of my friends or whatever, at some moments, it's not a nice thing. And at moments, I can feel this emotional drive, to try to believe in such things. But on the other hand, that's not the rational argument, so it doesn't make me to doubt, in the sense of, providing argument against, but it makes me, feeling that, very slightly, but still this feeling that perhaps, it would be nice.
Thank you. Last question for Douglas. So Douglas, 2 minutes. Assuming Christianity is rational, does that mean it is fair? How is it fair for Jesus, an innocent man, to die for rapists and murderers?
The Bible never says that it was fair for Jesus to die. It was, and life isn't fair. Life isn't fair for us. I know if you're Christian, you believe that our sins were upon Jesus, and so justice was done. But the way the question is phrased, is it fair for an innocent man to be punished that way? Of course not. Unless you understand 2 Corinthians 5 to be saying Jesus actually became guilty, representing us, in which case it would be fair. But it wouldn't be an innocent person being punished. It would actually be a guilty person being punished. And that's an amazing thought, that one who people believed was sinless actually became guilty. But not through something he did, but through something I did.
Yeah, I agree. Life is not fair. Sometimes, evil is, being sort of gratified, and goodness is being punished in this life. And I don't even believe in any kind of final judgment, where sort of things would be fixed in some way. So in that sense, perhaps my feeling of life being unfair is even higher. Also, the tenets of Christianity itself, I'm thinking often, is it fair that, humble, well-meaning, rational atheists like me go to hell, just because we don't blindly jump, on the Jesus bandwagon, and we don't want to close our eyes and we just see the evidence as we see it. I know some liberals say that everybody goes to heaven, but then there are these Christians who say that, you will go to hell if you don't believe.
Thank you for your questions. It's time for final statements. 3 minutes each. And starting with Robert is first.
Okay. Oh, well, never mind. I will be here. Yeah, I was already going there. So my advice would be that everybody should keep in mind that it's very difficult to find truth. Actually, it's impossible to find any truth with 100% certainty. If you have seen the movie Matrix, you know that it can be, and there's non-zero probability, that everything we see here now is just an illusion, and our brains are connected to some kind of weird machine feeding us these illusions. That's possible, but it's very unlikely, and I'll leave as a homework for you to decide why it's unlikely. So we can't know anything certainly, and the things we can know, and with some probability, we can know through rational thinking, meaning evidence, the simplicity of the theories, and also the common, like in science, the common agreement that there's multiple different repetitions and multiple different lines of evidence leading to the same conclusion. And I don't feel there is evidence for the two truths of Christianity in this kind of strong sense to warrant Christian belief to be rational. I think if that would be the case, there would be much less, clever atheists in the world who are really honestly trying to find out how things are and still come to the conclusion of atheism. Also, truths are not established by debates. So we are having here this debate, and whatever you think was the conclusion here, just remember it's the tip of the iceberg, and if you are interested for yourself for finding out what are the likely true statements and the likely mistakes, do use internet, and internet is very good nowadays because it has always all sides of arguments. You can find masses of information about these questions on history of Jesus and evidence for God and different religions. Also read books of different authors. We have, of course, the famous Gang of Four, who have been writing now the new atheistic books, and I would, of those, recommend mostly Daniel Dennett's Breaking the Spell, because he is very much discussing these psychological mechanisms and evolutionary mechanisms that can explain why religions are so popular and why human mind has tendencies towards religious thinking, even in the absence of God and supernatural things.
Time is up. Douglas, 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Just to make sure this is clear, I don't think the strongest evidence is just my experience. I was talking about some existential reason for rationality of Christianity. I think there's evidence from prophecy. Even physics has some implications, morality, ethics, and other areas, which we're not getting into right now. And actually, I think doubt can be a very good thing. If harnessed the right way, doubt can be an engine that leads us to greater understanding, even to greater faith. I would even say feelings can be a good thing. We have to be very careful, but it's not irrational to have a feeling. I believe actually there's ample evidence that Jesus lived, that he lived an extraordinary life, that he was executed, and that he came back from the dead and had an impact on so many that he changed the world, and continues to do this. And that since there is evidence, there's no virtue in remaining unduly skeptical. In March, I was in Argentina. I had just finished speaking in a church, and I was walking back to our apartment, and Placido Flamingo, the great tenor, was singing. I saw him with my own eyes. He was also on the big screens, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe it just looked like him and sounded like him. Maybe the posters were wrong. Maybe it was his chauffeur singing. Maybe the 120,000 witnesses gathered in the plaza were all mistaken like me. But it doesn't seem to be that way. But we're dealing with something far more important with Christianity, because eyewitnesses were willing to die. They were convinced. Even skeptics, deeply opposed to Christ, became convinced, like Paul, who may have been in brilliance and passion very similar to you, Robert. And so I think you could believe too. But I know you won't believe without a fight. You won't believe without subjecting everything to your critical faculties. Our world is irrational. I saw the news today, this elk, this moose who got his head caught at the tree near Göteborg. He was eating fermented apples, and he doesn't know where he's going. I think the world is very much like that. We're like the drunken moose. We're like the drunken elk. We don't know where we're going. We don't have answers to the basic questions of identity and origin and relationship and ethics and morality and destiny and purpose, and yet all of them are there in Christianity. The Christian message is true, and it is, in fact, reasonable. And so, ultimately, I believe it's not an intellectual issue, it's a moral issue. The way someone put it, I like this. It's not that Christianity has been tried and found defective. It's not been tried and found wanting. No, it's been found difficult, and it's been left untried.
Thank you very much. Let's say okay. Please fill in the feedback form before you go. And also want to say there is a possibility to continue discussion. The basement there is booked if you go out and down. And also, I want to just extend an invitation for an anniversary service here at 11 o'clock tomorrow, where Douglas is speaking. And I just want to thank you all for coming, and I wish you a nice evening. Thank you.
No, I have unfortunately other